Hello there, Commanders, and welcome to another episode of SUNTZU Podcast. This time we've gathered here to talk about our feedback of the second Pioneer test. And to do that, together with me today are Folksy.
Stop.
George.
Hello.
Astolfo.
Hello, beautiful people.
And Shlomi.
Shalom, boys and girls.
Yes, so to start with, we're just going to quickly run down the patch notes and what they have actually changed. So the first major change is longer respawn time, and we've actually talked about it in our podcast of feedback of the first test, that we think there should be longer respawns. NCA either just listened to us or they have come to the same conclusion and done that. Now each respawn time is longer by 10 seconds, and thanks to the patch notes we know that it is based on the ranks, which I personally like as well. So guys, what are your thoughts about this change in particular?
Well, one thing that comes up is it's still easier to sacrifice your units and respawn than to draw them out of a battle and replenish, and I think this kind of needs to be balanced out.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's a positive change. It's in the right direction, definitely. We can see that the longer respawns is definitely required, in my opinion. Otherwise, like they said, there's no downside to dying apart from giving the enemy veterancy. But I think that it probably needs some more tweaking. But I respect their efforts, because obviously the only way you can properly get it bang on is by having people to actually play the game and test out what is considered the right level.
And to correct you there, guys, you actually not only give more XP to your enemies, but usually you will also lose your own XP if you die. So preserving your units is also quite important. But yeah, longer respawn times now are more punishing, and I personally also am 100% behind that idea. Foxy?
I like the idea as well, like still improving the system basically, because sometimes it's just too easy to exploit the system how it is right now. I think like a lock timer on your respawn would be nice if you only keep like one of your squads in the respawn square and you send the rest off to fight and die, so that they don't respawn ASAP basically. So you have to like a lockout timer because you're still standing in the what's it called? The replenishment zone, basically.
Yeah, what I think is that previously with quite short respawn times, what we've observed is that in many situations, even if you consider all the factors like XP, travel time back to the healing zone, if you were to actually disengage and try to survive, other than as opposed to die and then respawn, if you take all of that into consideration, now it is much better idea, or rather a better idea in many more situations to stay alive than to die than it was before. And that is definitely a step in the right direction, and that change addresses the issue. And well, maybe we'll see some further adjustments, but so far, in the 7 days of testing we had, I felt like the respawn times just felt more or less right. So maybe some slight tweaks, but overall, they're in pretty good position right now. So, anyone wants to add something, or shall we proceed?
I would like to comment on the replenishment zone a little bit, as it's kind of related. As a slower infantry player, I would come into contact with defeating the player and him either respawning before I can get to the flag to contest it, or capture it. And it was very frustrating for an infantry player on, for example, Thermopylae to defeat the opponent, and then before I can get and capture the flag, he's already respawned in my face because he had, I noticed a lot of people would leave one unit back and send two into the pass, and they would respawn their other two units endlessly until you could just foot slog through them. but you would have to go back and replenish too. So it just turned into this weird stalemate where a player wasn't even using one of his units. And I'm like, well, that's not fun.
Yes, true, but you need to be aware that by doing so, right, by keeping one unit back and just sending 2 forward, you are sacrificing a lot. So yes, you'll respawn a little bit faster because it's just 10 seconds of healing as soon as a unit dies, rather than wait until everything dies or just go there and fight and retreat and then heal. Yes, you're getting that faster respawn, but then again, you're giving 1 unit up on the front line, and you're possibly giving away a lot of XP, and there are many factors that kind of balance that kind of game playstyle. So I don't really have much issues with it. But here we are talking about just the respawn time itself. There are other factors to balance in terms of respawning, such as placement of those respawn zones. And on map like Thermopylae, they're actually very close to the capture point itself. So maybe if they were placed a little bit further away, that would also help that issue. So yeah, there are many ways of balancing those problems other than just adjusting the spawn time. Okay, so I think that's it. Let's move on to the next change, which are the PV adjustments, where they apparently have nerfed AI on tiers 1, 2, 3. And what are your feelings about that if you have played on those tiers?
Well, to be honest, they're still really bad, like compared to a player. I'm not sure how a new player would perceive them, to be honest. So I can't talk from that perspective. But like I would say, as a seasoned player, it's still like a clown fiesta. The AI is pretty much like, I guess it's stupid. You have to actually use the word stupid there. They don't walk out of fire. They don't care about stakes, really. They don't care about caltrops that much. It's like you can exploit them really easily. But in a one-on-one fight, it's still like a little bit of strategy just obliterates them.
Anyone
I
else?
guess for new players, it's easier, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I think for new players, it's a reasonable positive change, I think, because we all know how long like tiers 1 to 3 take. It's not very many battles. You're down at that sort of level if you just play 1 unit, that is. And yeah. I feel that, you know, units that when they don't run out of this fire and stuff necessarily, obviously to us it doesn't make a lot of sense if we're playing against them as players, obviously. But I think for new players, just sort of, it even teaches you how to use your abilities, if that makes any sense.
Actually, you're right.
I think that, you know, if you're playing like a Vercingetorix, you're learning him, and you want to throw down this fire, you want to see what it does, you want to see how much damage it can deal, what its potential is. You throw it down on this AI unit, and you can see the damage, you can see the potential that this ability has. You know what its capabilities are now. And so when you start playing against players, you understand the value of that ability after seeing what it's capable of, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that is true, actually, yeah.
Astolfo, Shlomi, your thoughts?
I think it's kind of a disservice to players a little bit, because yes, it makes their entry into the game easier and you want more people into the game, but you know, when you have an easier AI and that sets a bar of difficulty and that's what they expect, and then they go against players who, you know, some of us have been playing since pre-alpha Steam. Just on a whim, I could be down on tier 5 grinding up, I don't know, what an off unit I don't usually play, like Roman Javelins. And someone who's coming into that situation is going to feel completely powerless. I get that, you know, playtime and experience should be rewarded, but also I think either a more robust tutorial or the AI to really give them a trial by fire would be a good thing, especially because you can play in that low ping training ground with AI because there's less people connected, and it's obviously less punishing. You don't have another team, you know, winning against you.
And Shlomi, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the what's kind of curious, the AI actually does a kind of good job when it comes to a macro game. So you see a lot of games where even seasoned players start off losing points and then get it back. That's because, as the other said, the AI is just too bad when it comes to actually fighting, using their advantages and getting out of bad situations. So if they fix the micro AI a bit and tone down the macro to not make it frustrating for players who just run into 4 AI players 30 seconds into the game, I think that would be a good change. But then again, it's grinding to 3, 4, 5, and well, off you are, no?
Okay, so my thoughts to address, for example, what Shlomi said about the macro game. Yes, AI is actually very good in that regard because, well, it's actually not very hard. All they do is just attack and they don't camp. So that already provides pressure across the map, and that is really good. So that's essentially something that players should learn from AI. And also about learning from AI, that is a very difficult argument, and you actually present arguments for both sides of the conflict here. Because either you make AI really good, as it was in the previous test, and then players, they can actually learn stuff from AI. It's like, okay, AI did something like this in this situation, and that was a really good move because, well, AI won this engagement because of that. Maybe I should pick that up from the AI and start doing it myself, right? So you can have that argument, but then if AI is too good, it will continuously win against players, especially since they're the beginner players. And like we've seen beginning players struggling with AI really hard, as also Shlomi pointed out. It usually, because of our veteran presence, AI was crashing at the beginning, but then thanks to our experience, we slowly managed to carry the game back in most cases. So yeah, for us, it wasn't really an issue, and the players around us had some veteran players to carry them. But if there are no veterans present, right, they may just get crushed, and if they're losing against AI, that may really lower their morale, and essentially as they're beginning players, the first few battles may very well decide whether or not they will continue playing the game or just drop it and say it's not for them. So you usually would like to give them a few easy wins at the beginning to make them feel confident, make them feel like, oh, this game's so cool, haha, I'm having fun, because, well, no one really is having fun if they're getting crushed. And usually people tend to have fun if they feel more powerful, which is easier to feel more powerful against weaker AI. But also what I've seen in terms of AI that changed compared to the previous test, first of all, I've actually noticed the change across all tiers, not just different AI in tiers 1 to 3 and then better AI or AI as it used to be in the higher tiers. So I felt a change across the board. Maybe it was just a coincidence that I haven't noticed that previously. But there were a lot of situations where AI just literally stopped working. When their units got small, they just stopped moving at all. So that's kind of a bug. But for example, I was capping a zone with cavalry. There were 2-3 units of infantry very close to the capture point, and they just would stand there and look at me. Maybe they thought, oh, too big of a threat, I cannot get close, but I'm capping your point, come and stop me, right? So AI kind of just, well, they literally stood there in place and were just looking at me until I do something. So yes, that was an issue that AI maybe have been damped down too much. And apart from the abuses, right, like we've discovered a few ways to abuse the AI because AI, well, just being stupid maybe, or maybe just being buggy, or just not polished well enough. But let's say that's a separate issue that doesn't come up too often. And well, it's after all just AI, right? Anyway, Foxy?
I actually like that the AI sometimes doesn't really work because it feels more human. If you like a normal and you have like 3 units across the map and they're like in totally different places, you only have focus on one unit, so you don't know what's going on like with the second one. So maybe you encounter a player at a flag or at a watchtower that's literally just like AFK in quotation marks because he's concentrated on a battle on the other side of the map, so you can just like take advantage of it. So I like that the AI sometimes works out like that. But yeah.
True, that's a good argument. And I remember when some of you were talking earlier, I think it was George, that, yeah, it kind of feels, like the change between when you start playing against AI and then start playing against players. Maybe that was Astolfo. Yeah, from what I've noticed, there are many cases where battles against humans, especially on lower tiers, were actually much easier than battles against AI. Because, well, the actual players were very often weaker than AI when we could abuse them, maybe even more way than you can abuse AI.
Yeah,
Foxy?
like most of the time, it's against an AI, you don't really know what to expect. I had like some situations where I tried to bait the AI by moving really close to get them into phalanx, for example, and it just wouldn't do it. Like, I'm like, come on, go into fucking phalanx, and nope, they just wouldn't do it. And you're confused for like a second or two, like why doesn't the AI react at all? And then you try to exploit it, and then they suddenly react, and then you're fucked.
Well, you can learn the AI thinking patterns, but that's not something that a lot of players are going to do. Maybe some of the more extreme that really like to abuse AI for whatever reason. I mostly just went into battle against AI for kind of a relaxation, kind of a break between fighting against humans. To just calm down a little bit between higher stake matches. And yeah, that's like not that big of a deal. So anyway, let's continue on to the next change. The next change was a little map change. They changed respawn points associated with different capture points on Passage of Augustus. So what do you guys think about those changes?
I mean, Passage of Augustus is quite a different map compared to the other ones and the way it's played. And I think we especially saw that in the show match. You know, if you want a quick game, then Passage of Augustus is the one, because I feel like the old respawn points did leave it way too sort of closed. I felt like on a lot of other maps, the respawn points, they didn't give you as much of like an advantage as on Passage of Augustus, because, for example, the respawn points you could shoot from like your respawn point into the enemy base over the middle section, and I feel like something like that probably isn't a good image for the game, being as that's the only map and the only situation where something like that is possible. It doesn't sort of give that continuity. It almost feels like a bug in that sort of sense. It's the only time you can do that.
Anyone else?
I think just some general map tweaks on reinforcement points, or changing how contesting points might do some good for a lot of maps. But I think we'd be here forever if I went into specifics on each map and things like that.
Yeah, we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in more detail later. Also, I talked about it a little bit earlier as well when we were talking about longer respawns, right? How the changes to where the actual respawn points are located is also a balancing factor in the overall feeling of the respawn mechanic altogether. So yeah, I hope that we will see some further tweaks, especially as I have observed on certain maps, like for example on Capitoline Hill, the healing zones are quite far away from strategic points. So for example, if you capture C, no one on flanks can really access that C healing point that it provides very quickly, and it's mostly a defensive healing point where you want to defend against one of the pushes from one of the flanks, rather than helping you actually attack further. So that actually slows down the battles on Capitoline Hill quite significantly compared to other maps, like maybe Alpis Graia, where the C point or the healing point that C provides is actually much more aggressive. Also, if you capture one of the points on the flank from the enemy team, it also gives you quite a nice respawn point, especially if that's on the hill side. So that map tends to be more aggressive and more dynamic, thanks to that more forward placement of those healing zones. So yeah, I would like to see some tweaks in that area to see how the games and their dynamics will change based on where the healing zones are placed. And possibly CA have already tested that in-house, and we are just seeing the final result, what they have deemed to be the optimal healing zone spot. But we'll see about that. So I think that's everything that we wanted to say on the map changes. I'll take that as IS. So let's go into the next change, which are elephant changes. The elephant changes include elephants dealing less damage to each other and spears dealing more damage to elephants. What are your thoughts, guys?
Well, I guess. Go ahead, Shlomi.
Yeah, Shlomi, go first.
Well, I'm always for an elephant nerf, because with single entity units, it's always hard to balance, because unless the elephant is dead, it deals full damage. So I think they can do a bit more. Maybe still a bit too mobile, in my opinion.
Foxy?
Yeah, I guess they are too mobile, actually. Like, I don't really care about the armor that they have, and I don't really care about the damage that they deal, because it's quite predictable. It only gets complicated if the elephants are stacked. So maybe increase their hitboxes for against each other, so that they can't like gang up on one single spot. But in general, they're really fast. Like if they stampede, for example, they can dash quite a long distance, actually. So I guess that's why it's hard for javelins at the moment to really counter elephants as well, because they're more focused on running away from the elephant and actually engaging them and slowing them down to apply pressure. And that's, I think, the biggest issue right now. Like, they have quite a bit of armor and HP and stuff like that, but there are quite a lot of units which could kill an elephant, like Germanicus on medium infantry, for example, or foxes or barbarian swords. Even cavalry can deal quite a lot of damage, but elephants ganging up and their mobility is just a really big problem, I guess.
True. I overall agree with the general gist that elephants are OP, and I find speed as a very interesting balancing factor in their case. We know it has been tweaked in the past in regard of the projectiles slowing them down, of how much when you shoot at them they start way down on them and elephants actually get slower. But yeah, javelins are supposed to be one of the best counters to elephants, but because of elephant speed and ability to push for units, even if javelins gang up on elephants with another player with infantry that can stop them to some extent, that infantry is not going to stop them forever, and elephants are just going to walk through infantry, start chasing the javelins, and javelins won't be able to shoot, because if they start shooting they will be caught, and infantry just keeps chasing at the elephants, and yeah, that's just not a good state of the game in regards of elephants, I believe. So yeah, they definitely look into that rather than just the damage numbers alone. But also an interesting thing to look at here is that they lower the damage that elephants deal to themselves. So overall, I agree with the, let's say, design ideology that the units themselves shouldn't be the best counters to also themselves, right? So elephant shouldn't be the best counter to elephant, a ranged unit shouldn't be the best counter to a ranged unit, and artillery shouldn't be the best counter to artillery, which sadly quite very often actually is the case. So the CA should take steps towards fixing that kind of situation. And in terms of elephants, well, that's quite easy. Just lower the damage that elephants deal to each other. And for example, in terms of ranged units, they could just give them loose formation, so then when ranged units shoot each other, they will also naturally just deal less damage to each other. So I think those sort of changes definitely improve the overall health of the game, and I like to see more steps in that direction overall, not just for elephants. Anyone else want to chip on the topic? George, Astolfo?
I think elephants are definitely a challenging one, because when you talk about mobility, obviously it is essentially a mounted unit, if that makes any sense. It's going to be faster than your average infantryman. I dare say that none of us could outrun an elephant, and so I think with the mobility, it's probably best to tweak around their sort of special abilities, like what Falks touched on with the Stampede. And also going back to what Shlomi said about it being a single unit, I do agree that makes things very difficult to balance, because, like you said, full HP, 1 HP still does the same amount of damage. And even with infantry, obviously, say you're in a spear phalanx, not all your men can be on that front line. So, to be honest, what is the damage potential of most other units? If you're fighting in just a one-on-one engagement of infantry, not all your men are fighting at once. You're lacking some of that damage potential. Is locked in those like rear ranks. Whereas with an elephant, it's all there. It's all, it's either everything or nothing. And so that is difficult to balance, because it feels like if you tweak it one way or the other, it does become all or nothing. I do agree that elephants are overpowered, but I wouldn't want to see them get to a state where they're useless and no one ever plays them. I think there should always be a place for every unit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of units have went, through the cycles of buffing and nerfing, where one patch they're super strong and the other patch they're suddenly super weak, and CA have struggled to balance those things the right way, find a sweet spot, but after many patches they actually managed to find it after all, for most of those units. And yeah, it's still ever going balancing process that is never going to stop because of all the changes that come into the game, new factions, new mechanics, and in the light of the new game mode, right, also a lot of balance changes. Well, they change, the balance overall changes. Just like elephants got huge buff in this new game mode, right, because of how important contesting points is, and elephants are absolutely great at doing that. Astolfo?
I was going to say, I think they're going to have to be creative with how they balance elephants if they want them to never, outshine other units and yet not be useless. Because I agree with George. Elephants were a huge part of Carthage's image back then. They weren't as common as a lot of people think, but they were a huge part of their image, and they should be in the game. They have a place in the game, and so they shouldn't be useless. But at the same time, there are definite units that are a lot better at killing them, like Falk said, Vengeance Germanicus, an Ad Portus infantry, pretty much anything that can spike its weapon damage to the moon. And then, so I was thinking a more interesting way you could do it, instead of changing the damage numbers around a lot, and this would help with javelins too, is you could mess with the forced march, because it reduces their morale. And I think you could maybe try and balance elephants through morale. If they want to move at that higher speed to chase down javelins, which are supposed to be a counter, then they have to sacrifice some morale. And then infantry, if they're attacking them, could proc a rear flank. Don't make it as extreme as infantry, because it's an elephant, obviously.
But if you cannot flank an elephant.
True, that's what I'm saying. Is that if you had forced march on and you flanked it and it routed, might be
it's literally impossible in the game to flank an elephant. Just flanks don't apply to an elephant, unless they would introduce a change where you can actually flank an elephant.
That's what I'm saying. Is like they're gonna have to think out of the box if they want the elephant to
be able
not
to be
be above other things. or be below other things. I'm not saying specifically that. I'm saying that's one way you could handle it, right? Is if the elephant chooses to run past your infantry to get to the range, it should be punished like every other unit. I can't just take my cavalry and pull through an infantry unit without getting my health bar decimated or my morale broken.
True. Also, let's just get something out there, that elephants were and still are one of the top unit types in the game, and they have been since they were released. So if they suddenly were below average, I think it would be, well, just fair, even, if they just got a little bit over nerfed. Obviously you never want to over nerf something, right? And you want it to be in the sweet spot, but overall the game wouldn't suffer, and the elephants players also wouldn't suffer that much, right? Because you've been top dogs for so much time. Your crown is not going to fall off if you suddenly be a little bit less useful than you used to be, less OP. And it also would feel frustrating, right, for other people who don't play elephants and they play something else, and it's like, oh, these elephants are always so OP. When is my time to shine? Foxy?
I was just thinking about like an out-of-the-box solution, basically. Like, not to derail here, but we can just add like another system basically to the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Foxy. Okay. I think we are a little bit derailing already. So
Okay.
I would like to move on. I'm sorry. I know, but for the sake of the length of this podcast, let's move on slowly.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
No worries, man.
I wanted to touch onto. We didn't even really get to the bonus damage for spears, right? But okay, quickly, let's say that I think that spears still kind of suck against elephants, and that bonus damage is not going to help. And with that, let's move on to the last change of the patch notes, and that is the heavy artillery rework, in huge air quotations, that they have basically removed the first 3 tiers, or rather pushed the line further and cut off the last 3 tiers. So now you don't have body pulls anymore, they're just regular catapults, or onagers, or however you want to call them. They still look the same and work the same, at least in the game. And apart from that, they included stakes being buffed in that patch note. So yeah, I'll just start by saying that this is not a heavy artillery rework that I've been wishing for, and I hope this is just the first step. But yeah, moving it later in tiers doesn't really change much, apart from players not being frustrated on lower tiers, which is, I guess, a good thing. And stakes being buffed, absolutely ridiculous idea, because stakes are already OP and annoying as fuck. So yeah, please don't buff them, please nerf them instead, and maybe just fix them, because as they are right now implemented in the game, they are totally not in a great spot. Your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't really mind heavy artillery that much. Like, it's never been a sort of pet hate of mine or anything. That I rarely encounter it, and I feel like when I do encounter it, it isn't like that frustrating and stuff. And I haven't played it myself on this new patch, like with the new game mode with the Chinese release. I haven't done any of that, so I don't know how the new game mode's affected it. I imagine they're slightly easier to use now because people sort of generally clump up around the points. But so obviously the units are more grouped up to be hit by something like heavy artillery. But generally, I don't really see the need to change the heavy artillery. That's just personal, though. I assume there's probably some people out there that love the heavy artillery and want it to be how it was, or there are probably some people that say, no, it hasn't gone far enough, it should only be very high tier, or it should be nerfed or something like that. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear other people's opinions.
May I come on?
Obviously. You may indeed.
All right. So my thoughts on heavy artillery is again, it's like the elephants. It has a place in the game, and I'm not saying remove it. But there's a reason it wasn't allowed in many of the tournaments. And there's a reason, people sigh when they see 2 heavy already players on their team, or they see, one on the other team. It's kind of an anti-fun unit, to be honest. Like, if I'm going against it, and it's only one, it can have a huge impact on the game. Not so much anymore. That's why I'm saying don't get rid of them, because they're not going to decap you constantly as you're capping things. But at the same time, if you have 2 of them on your team, their effect doesn't increase much, and you have basically 2 players sitting there doing nothing. And I'm like, well, now we just lost a flag because we have an entire less player fighting over this flag. Sure, you could argue that your artillery will support you, but that's not always the case. For example, they may not have vision. They might be in the pass where you can't arc your rocks in. Tons of things like that. And I can't really advocate a change personally for them because I never played them. They were anti-fun to me. So, but those are kind of my thoughts on them.
Mm-hmm. I kind of disagree here with how you presented that issue, because how an artillery player is effective with his artillery is completely up to him and his skill with that unit, and that is the case for every unit. You can say exactly the same about archers, infantry, cavalry, and any other unit. So that is kind of out of the equation. Let's say it just evens out amongst all other unit types. But heavy artillery is one of the unit types that have been most significantly impacted by the new game mode. One of the new strengths they have is getting more XP for always killing units, pretty much. Well, they almost always kill every single mod that they touch. They can now very easily stop people from healing. So, for example, if you get a point that is quite forward, the enemy team takes one of your 2 starting capture zones. They have a much forward capping zone, and then you can, even if you're camping, right, you can just keep bombarding that healing zone, and no one that enters that healing zone can ever heal because it's constantly bombarded, and they're getting hit every less than 10 seconds, and they can heal because of that. And unless the healing zone is somewhere between buildings or rocks or whatever, but that's very often not the case. And well, the same applies even if you're much forward and you have aggressive positioning with artillery. And overall, I think that a lot of issues that we had with artillery still persist. They just maybe in a slightly different shape. But yeah, a lot of issues that I had with artillery, I think definitely didn't disappear. It's just hard for me to say how significant they are anymore, because I haven't really played against heavy artillery that much. Like, not a lot of players have played heavy artillery, so I don't have a big enough sample size to be able to accurately tell and provide feedback on that topic. But just on like theoretical level, I think artillery still has a lot of issues in how it is designed and how it plays and what kind of gameplay it encourages for all the players and how it impacts the entire game. And again, that is a unit type that changes how both teams play and every single player in the game. Like, you don't really care whether the enemy has, I don't know, Roman infantry or not, right? Whether or not they have it doesn't really matter. But whether or not they have heavy artillery, that changes the entire dynamic of the game. Though with the new game mode, it is not as impactful now because, well, it's much more about the capture points than, well, previously it was kill all the enemy forces or capture the base, which artillery was good at very good at both, because they just prevented you from capturing the base because they could always decap, and they were very good at killing you. Right now, that is no longer the issue, or not as much of an issue. But it's, in my opinion, which is very redundant thing to say, artillery still needs to be reworked. It definitely needs to be looked at again in the light of the new game mode, obviously, but changes are definitely needed. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Honest,
Okay, Shlam.
This time you go ahead.
Okay,
Okay.
Farxet, let's go.
I think we have to see more matches with heavy RT. I personally haven't seen many. I believe I haven't had an enemy RT player at all in that whole week. At least I can't remember.
We should have played more.
I didn't really. Well, I did. But I think we need more data in general, like which positions RT players tend to go on specific maps and stuff like that. It's all still obscure data, I guess. So I would like to at least have like the next patch on, the next test on that patch with those changes, and then maybe in the test after the next one, they have enough data to actually say like what can be changed, what actually would improve the gameplay and the health of the game, and not just how to nerf RT or how to buff RT, you know?
Yeah. So we essentially have the same thing as I did, as we just didn't play against artillery or with artillery enough because not a lot of players play it. Yeah. So that's why I said my arguments can be only based on theory rather than actual practice and actual experience. Shlomi?
Yeah, Foxy said the most things, but I feel like for this game mode, heavy artillery has too many ifs to actually work. You need to get to a position where you can possibly hit 3 different respawn spots to be kind of useful. And then again, if you get overrun by something, it takes ages to get to a spot where you can actually be useful. You're just too slow on the map. But please, for God's sake, don't make heavy artillery like this running artillery, light artillery stuff. That would be fucked up.
Well, okay, here I just straight up disagree, because heavy artillery, despite its name, is very fast because it just packs up its IK artillery and runs with the speed of light infantry. So that is just not true that it is very slow on the map, because they pack up in 10 seconds and then they can go wherever they please. Yeah, it's just all down to the skill, and I think a skilled artillery player can still do some really, really good stuff for his team with smart positioning and all that stuff, just as he could in the past, because maps themselves haven't really changed. It's just how people move around them changed a little bit, which is a factor. It definitely is a factor of how the overall team cohesion behaves, as units are now all over the place, all over the map on both sides. So that probably contributes a little bit to artillery being slightly weaker, but that just depends on the situation. And we also need to consider how it will work in an organized team, in tournament setting as well. But let's move on to our next part of the podcast, which is issues to fix before the next big step. So whatever it is, whether it's closed beta, open beta, release, whatever they decide, anything that is tied to a next big marketing push from CA, Sega, NetEase, and whoever else is involved, what kind of issues they absolutely need to fix and get right before presenting the game to a wider public. Because in the past, they have failed kind of multiple times at the same thing. So when they first advertised Arena on Gamescom, and shortly afterwards they started closed beta, went from closed alpha to closed beta, and they invited a huge amount of players. Back at that time, they still haven't fixed pathfinding, and a huge amount of players, the first experience with Arena was with that terrible pathfinding, and I imagine that turned off a lot of people from the game. So they come in, that game is absolute shit because my units don't even go where I tell them to. I was like, how can I play this game? Okay, well, forget about this game, never gonna play it again. That was a huge shot in the foot. And then next, when they went from closed beta to open beta, first they released Carthage in its absolutely broken state. Well, more elephants than Carthage. Elephants were the broken thing. So yeah, a lot of people came into the game, and so an absolutely very, very badly balanced game because of elephants. And then they still haven't fixed, or they didn't have a solution for high-tier commanders on low-tier units. And then everyone who played in the first weeks of open beta encountered a lot of Russian parties going around with tier 5 units with tier 10 commanders and just rough stomping noobs. So yeah, that ruins the experience for a lot of people, and again, turning a lot of people away from the game. So what kind of issues like that do they need to fix and get right for the next big step, whatever it is? So I'll start here with and it is going to be unit coherency and things that are connected to that. So overall, what I mean by that is how the game feels, how it handles in terms of unit behavior. Like, it just doesn't feel smooth and intuitive at the moment. Where units often get stuck on top of each other, or just when you're puffing around a corner or just moving through a blob or whatever. Just a lot of situations where units suddenly lose their cohesion and end up all over the map. And then that causes a lot of other issues, like completely bullshit flanks. I mean, bullshit flanks happen even in like when units are absolutely cohesive, right? They haven't lost their cohesion, but bullshit flanks will still happen. But I just emphasize the problem. You have selection problems when you just click and drag. You want to select 2 units, but oops, there was one guy who got stuck in between your 2 other units or on subs of a tree, and you selected 3 units, except that 99 out of 100 guys of that unit are very, very far away. And now you have fucked up your micro because of that. So unit coherency kind of is shit at the moment. And yeah, as I said, causes a lot of issues, and they need to fix it so that when the game releases, it just feels right, feels smooth, feels intuitive, and just doesn't feel like that at the moment. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, obviously it's a key part of the game. You can't really get around that. A game that's about moving these 3 units around, something like the pathfinding and the cohesion of these units is obviously a big part of that. You want your units to perform as well as you do. And I have had problems, especially I noticed with the barricades. They just absolutely mess up units. Like, I can understand them blocking a unit, but trying to go around the side of them, your unit comes out in like 4 pieces on the other side. I'm not quite sure how he'd fix that exactly, that specific issue, but it's probably something that needs to be addressed.
Anyone else?
I think it's a huge part of the game, and it honestly defines some units. And for example, spearmen, I think, are a huge advocate of that, because you have your more densely packed formation that's Carthage, and their medium or heavy spears, and they tend to hold formation a lot better than if Greek spears, for example, which is kind of their main advantage to them. But at the same time, I've had many occasions where my Greek spears are up against swordsmen, and the phalanx, instead of pushing all together, the center will get bogged down on troops, and then the edges will keep going instead of just staying rigid with the front line like a phalanx should. And then when you start taking steps backwards, you can proc flanks, you can take free damage like you're dragging your unit through another unit. A few things like that. It doesn't always happen, and it's kind of rare when it happens, but when it happens, you're like, well, shit. I didn't die because I did a poor phalanx. I died because the edge of my unit bugged, or my 20 guys on the left side of my phalanx got caught in the unit instead of, pushing back with the rest of the unit.
Okay, so to address what you both guys said, in terms of phalanx itself, I actually don't feel like, they lose cohesion, obviously, in the way you described, but if you manage them wisely, I don't think you will run into those issues, because I think a lot of those issues that you've described are actually player caused, and it is just try to do what the player tells it to do. And if the player is good enough, he won't do such mistakes. But that also is connected to how how can you actually lead the unit, how you can issue the orders. Because you cannot just tell them to move slightly 5 steps forward into the unit, because the game just won't let you, because, well, there's an enemy unit there, and you cannot click and drag there. All you can do is right-click on that unit. And then the best you can do, right, is click behind the unit, behind the enemy unit, if you want them to move forward, and then that causes the issue. It is not necessarily the issue with unit coherency itself, it is more of the issue of the controls. But that is also quite connected of, how units control, how they handle, etc., etc. And one thing that is connected to phalanx, but also a lot other things, is how units detected to be in melee. It is a big issue for pike phalanx, which cannot go into phalanx if they are in melee. And it goes both sides, where, for example, one soldier gets stuck somewhere and he's being hacked down by some other units that just passes through. They're not actually engaged, but the game will still detect that you're in melee, and the main body of the unit won't be able to go into phalanx and get obliterated by another enemy. They should be allowed to go into phalanx, or the other way around. The pikes are actually engaged, you're fighting, but somehow the game decides they're not in melee, and they suddenly drop pike phalanx, and you're like, what the fuck? I totally were in fight with them, I was engaged in them. How did they deploy phalanx in the middle of the fight, right? And it continues beyond pike phalanx. If your ranged unit is engaged, that happens a lot. For example, your ranged units gets caught by a charge or something, and you try to escape, you dodge the charge, but a few of your guys got attacked, they got knocked over, and now they will be, lagging behind because they get stuck between enemy soldiers or your allied soldiers that come to help you. And even though like 95% of your unit is out of the engagement and ready to shoot, they won't be able to do so because a few of your soldiers are still stuck there and fighting, and you cannot use focus fire. And if you want to shoot that unit, you can't, because if your unit is engaged with a unit, if your ranged unit is engaged with a unit, the only thing you can do is a melee attack order rather than a shoot order. So that's a huge issue for ranged players that I'm very familiar with, and for the other units in more or less as well. So melee detection, and George pointed out something that reminded me of what I wanted to say in the first place, is that when you're playing the game, like Arena or any other game really that involves PvP, right? The only real struggle you should have is against other players. It is about how you outsmart, outplay, outmaneuver the enemy player, rather than how good you are in overcoming the game controls itself. So that's a huge issue for me in Conqueror's Blade. Luckily in Total War Arena is not as bad, but still those issues shouldn't be there. But then I very often will feel that, oh shit, I would have easily won that engagement if not for the shitty controls, right? Or I wouldn't have been in such a shitty situation if my unit wouldn't get randomly backed down by pathfinding and some shitty melee engagement detection or whatever, or any of those issues we mentioned. And yeah, then it feels like I've gotten fucked over by the game itself and its shitty controls or shitty issues, rather than me actually getting outplayed by the enemy player. Like, if I get outplayed by an enemy player, fine, he outplayed me, he absolutely deserves to obliterate me. But if I get obliterated by an enemy player because of something wrong with the game, that just doesn't feel right, frustrates a player, and then possibly causes the player to stop playing, right? And that's definitely what developers don't want. They want players to keep playing the game and hopefully buy stuff, right? So the game can earn money. Any thoughts on that?
I guess, because what I notice in the game right now is that we still have the issue with flanking a unit that is already engaged. Sometimes it just wouldn't route, or like your flank wouldn't register at all, even though you clearly are attacking his, for example, his two flanks, side flanks, like left flank and right flank, and it just wouldn't apply the debuff, which used to be a big problem on all units, but now it's especially bad if the unit is in combat and is already heavily damaged. It just wouldn't register the flanking, so maybe some improvement there would be really nice for the future, or for the next patch, I guess. And what I really would like to see in the game is a force move command, like we have an attack command, just normal right click. We have a move attack, which is, I believe, set and right click on terrain. Basically forces your unit to move there, but also attack everything that is in, like, next to them, near them, in their line of sight, or like in the path that they should walk. But there's no force move. And what I noticed is in big battles, it's really hard to align your units to, for example, a charge path, because you have to click behind the enemy units to actually align all your 3 units to perform a good charge. And you can't really find a good place to right click, because there's no open terrain, there's only enemy units.
Yeah, that actually, Foxy, is something that we've covered in one of the past podcasts. You should definitely watch it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't remember in which one it was exactly, but I did propose pretty much the exact same solution.
Nice.
When it comes to aligning your charge or your phalanx or whatever, actually, or when you want to walk around the edges of an engagement with your ranged units, for example, right? You just can't go there because, well, there's a unit in it, so all you can do is right click on them. But if you right click, then you'll attack them or shoot them and then cause friendly fire possibly, or something that you don't want to do, and the game just doesn't allow you to do what you want to do. That is my issue. Yes. And about flanking, yes, your issue that you pointed out, something that I wanted to mention as well, of the overall game feeling. There are instances where you completely surround an enemy unit and it just has no flanks, even though you outnumber them 100 to 1 even, as nope, I'm not flanked, fuck you. Right, I'm wavering, I'm surrounded, I'm getting killed, but yeah, one guy will still survive for so long. And it contributes to the overall feeling of that something is not right. This guy is surrounded, this unit is surrounded, should be flanked, should be decimated in seconds, but it isn't. And that's what they need to fix. The overall feeling of the game, where in many places it just doesn't feel right. Okay, I think we've exhausted the topic quite heavily. So let's move on to the next issue. Foxy, what, in your opinion, they need to fix before the next big step?
I wouldn't say really fix, because I'm, to be honest, still torn on the topic. But I think they should make their mind up on what they want to do, because we have seen so many changes to unit speed and speed in general, for example, in terrain, like light forest, heavy forest, stuff like that. And it seems like every couple of months we get a new patch that messes with the unit speed, and it's really hard to get accustomed to like one scenario, because I only play foxes, well, mostly, I guess, and I have to use that movement speed as best as I can. And in this patch, they removed the decimal points for movement speed on the units, at least on the display, like when you are in the equipment screen of the unit itself. There are some bars. And if you equip, for example, some new boots that increase your movement speed by, let's say, 10%, the bar will get bigger, and maybe your base movement speed is 5. Now it should be 5.5. That's how it used to be. But it only displays 5 or 6. I actually I haven't figured out how the system rounds. I haven't really looked at it yet, but it rounds to a full decimal. So it kind of defeats the purpose of really customizing your unit, because you equip an additional consumable that increases your movement speed, and it actually doesn't, unless you, for example, go into a forest. Sometimes that consumable will actually give you enough movement speed so you don't decrement your movement speed by 1 whole meter per second. But like for the most time in a match, you're not in the forest, so you just have a a wasted consumable or like a wasted boot slot or whatever it is that gives you movement speed. But on the other hand, it opens up some nice combinations. Like, okay, maybe I actually don't need that slot for movement speed, because on my foxes I have to equip movement speed. If there's some pants that give me 10% movement speed but minus 20% body armor, for example, I have to use them because they gave me movement speed. So I'm quite torn on the topic. I'm not sure what's best, but I think they shouldn't mess around with movement speed too much. Like, they should make their mind up how it should be done and then do it that way and not change it constantly. It gets quite annoying. Your thoughts?
From what I've noticed, or rather what other people have told me, is that the movement speed of units is all over the place. They have made a lot of changes to it over the transition from wargaming to NetEase. And for example, the Barbarian Cavalry apparently is no longer the fastest, but I don't know how it is with all the movement speed buffs available to Barbarian Cavalry, because obviously we can assume that most of the Barbarian infantry will be run on Arminius, right? And they need to consider their movement speed with the momentum buff, rather than just their movement speed alone, the base movement speed. Obviously that influences how the Vercingetorix Cav and other cavalry will be played. We don't really play cavalry with Boudica or Ambriorix. You can play with Boudica, but okay, that's out of the question. What I'm saying is that, yeah, they have definitely introduced a lot of changes, and I don't really know where they're going with it. They did a developer blog, detailing some of the changes they've introduced, mainly focusing on the new game mode, because, well, that's obviously the biggest change. But yeah, I would like them to release another dev blog detailing, for example, where the hell are they going with speed, and what are they going to do with it, and what is their thought process behind it. Because, yeah, right now I have really no idea what they're aiming for. Then again, I haven't really looked too deep into it. But yeah, I've noticed in some instances the speed of some units felt off. It just didn't really feel right. I can't really describe it better. Anyone else? Foxy?
Just to add, I actually noticed that they removed the movement speed on Rebellion on Boudica. It used to give you 10% when at tier 8, I believe, or tier 9, something like that. And they removed that talent as well. So they don't only make changes to the units and then make a dev blog and describe their thought process behind that specific change. But then there are some changes which they don't explain. For example, why did they remove the movement speed on Rebellion? Why did they decrease the movement speed on that specific unit or on that consumable, for example? So I guess the overall picture is missing. Like, we don't know what they want to actually have, what they have in mind, basically, yeah.
Yeah, and because of that, it's actually very hard to provide feedback. Okay, yes. Anyone else, or shall we move to another person?
I think Faux clearly knows his stuff when it comes to movement speed changes. There's not a lot I can add. I haven't really looked into it myself. But from what he's been saying, yeah, some clarity and some definitive answers would be nice.
I would like to add a brief thing. Something that I've noticed that the movement speed, I want a very defined movement speed so that, I can put that 8% on from my my consumables or my equipment. And I want to definitely know if I'm faster or not than this enemy unit, right? And when you're at these, 5.0 like flat things like he was talking about with no decibels, you might not know. You might have the same rounded off speed as another unit, right? And I think part of using your tactics is knowing if you're going to run that guy down from behind or not. Of course, there's a bunch of abilities that can change all that and dictate that, right? But at a base level, it is nice to know that I'm going to outrun this Roman infantry because his movement speed is X and my movement speed is Y.
Yep, definitely. Clear information is what it should be everywhere with everything. Shlomi, anything to add?
I doubt there's anything I can add to that.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next person. George, what is your issue?
I think one thing they could definitely look at, and I think a main thing they could look at, is things out of the game, out of the battles, because to be honest, I think it's quite lacking at the moment. We can see that they've added these daily missions, and I think they're good. I like the intention behind them. The execution, yeah, a little bit off, but we haven't seen anything like that from them before, so you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be perfect the first time. And I think that overall it's a good step, but the testing and implementation will have to be refined, definitely, over the course of the next patches, hopefully. But I think there's also a lot more they could do with it. I think that the commander trial tokens are few and far between, and that really links in with what they can do outside of the battles in the economy sense, because I feel like silver is good. I feel like the amount of unit XP you gain in comparison to your commander XP, like leveling him up, I think that's also good. I don't feel like your commander is miles ahead of your units. I don't feel like your units is miles ahead of your commander either. I feel like that's a reasonably good place. That people could make arguments for tweaking it either way, I suppose, but generally it's not a main priority, but it is something that could be tweaked. But I do feel like unlocking new commanders is definitely like a problem, because I wanted to try out Ambiorix, for example, last patch, and I simply never got enough XP. I unlocked Scipio, and that was it. And so I feel like creative ways of getting more free XP, or more ways of getting trial tokens, or ways to try out commanders would certainly add to the sort of overall economy of the game. And I feel like that could be done with just like features we discussed before on these podcasts, such as campaigns, or like some form of longer mission streaks or something. But obviously the direct implementation of that is down to people at NetEase and CA of what direction they would like their game to go. But yeah, I believe that's probably quite a key problem that we've got at the moment.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with that. Back in one of the podcasts in the past, someone made a really good argument of how the new game mode with the capture points introduces some kind of shorter term goals to focus on for the players, instead of just I'll either kill the entire army or capture the base and then you win. So I think that philosophy is really good, and it should be carried over to the metagame, right, outside of the battles themselves. So right now, what the overall goal is to grind to tier 10. I mean, that's going to take quite a while. So I think they should introduce, yes, things like campaigns and other stuff to give us some shorter term goals. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna, for example, try to finish this campaign within this week or this month, or there's a time limited event here. So yeah, if I participate in that event, I can get a lot of XP, or maybe some special stuff, maybe some other new feature, right? We talked about banners, so there's a limited event where you can get a lot of banners and then have a huge stockpile for the future, and don't have to worry about them for the next few months, something like that.
Yeah, could I just come back in there? That's all right. I'm just thinking, when you said about the tier 10, it's quite a grind. I agree with you. Yeah, it does take quite a while in comparison to other things. But I do feel that is counterbalanced by the fact that there's not a lot to do after tier 10. I feel like if you made it too fast, then you'd have a lot of bored people. And so I feel like the shorter term goals would have to come in with some form of possibly end game features. I'm not quite sure about how you would add that. Maybe other people have some ideas, but I feel like if you give people these short-term goals that increase the amount of grind, etc., it does make the end game slightly more tedious, if that makes any sense. I'm not quite sure if I use the right word there.
Maybe disagree, because what these short-term goals are about is about actually speeding up the progression, right? Because you have a set of missions, and then every mission gives you some kind of a reward, which the goal of those rewards is to overall speed up your progress, right? That's why you want to participate in those kinds of events, because hey, if I participate in this event, if I finish this campaign, I'll get my tier 10 sooner, right? And then I want to have tier 10 because, well, right now there's maybe not that big of a because, other than being always guaranteed to be top tier in the matchmaking, right? And just overall having more fun because tier 10 units have, well, the most abilities, right? And I personally, at least, find it a much more compelling experience where you have a lot of those abilities, you have a lot of things to do, and you have just more ways of carrying your team and outplaying your opponent or be outplayed. It's just a bigger thrill, better fun. That's why I would like to strive towards getting those tier 10s. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone. I've heard for a lot of people that, well, I just like tier 6 a lot. So I like my unit. This specific unit has a specific set of abilities that I really like and enjoy just enjoy playing tier 6, right? But then, yeah, that guy can get quickly bored. So also give him some stuff to do on the side. Anyone else?
To segue off of that, I was one of the people that I preferred tier 8. Obviously, you couldn't find tier 10 matches in NA depending on the time. So that was a large factor in why I played tier 8 a lot. But I personally liked tier 8 a lot. In pretty much the regards that you said, I found most of the units pretty engaging and entertaining and unique at that tier for the factions I played. Another thing to loop back to George's idea on endgame, I think they really need to hammer out an endgame at some point. Probably, in the next few weeks or months, if you're planning on releasing or something. And I don't know what time frame they have in mind, but look at a game like League of Legends. It's a free-to-play game. It costs nothing to download. None of the champions cost you any money if you don't want to spend any money on them. Riot Games wasn't always a large company. I mean, now they are, yes, but they carried that same model pretty much throughout the game's life. And really the way they do it is down to, some skins. Cosmetics are mostly what keeps everything going. Name changes, other things of that nature. And the end game in that game is ranked. You grind rank to be a higher rank to say you're a higher ranked. I don't know if you go down the path of having a ranked system in Arena. I don't know if it's good for the health of the game. But I think at some point you do need to seriously look at what your end game is, because I can tell you right now that when I reach tier 10, I'm probably just going to go to another faction and play another faction unless I have some friends on that are like, hey, you want to play tier 10? Granted, that thought process was hugely limited to the fact that tier 10 games were very rare in NA because there were less players and they were extremely time limited, and if you weren't on for basically the 60-minute time chunk, you weren't going to get a play tier 10. But at the same time, a clearly defined end game is healthy for your game, especially as you move towards release, right?
But I think that endgame isn't one of the actually top priorities to get before the release. Like, there are many other much more important things than the endgame. And if they introduce some kind of an endgame, obviously they have to at some point. But I don't necessarily think that point should be the release or the next big step. That can wait. Obviously, the sooner the better. Maybe not necessarily as well. But yeah, I don't think like endgame in particular is a burning issue. The metagame, the lack of stuff to do outside of the game, right? That is a lot more of a burning issue because that correlates to a much larger portion of the player base rather than the end game. And first you want to ensure that larger portion of your player base doesn't leave the game, that it finds the game amusing to play and interesting to do things and doesn't get burnt out quickly. That is, you need to secure that base, that wider player base, and then you start building the end game on top of that, rather than the other way around, I think.
I agree with that, but I mean, this is also, no offense to them, but this is going to be their third release, and there's a reason people stop playing. I was not one of them. I truly loved the game and the process of playing the actual match. It totally hooked me. It hooked all of us. That's why we're all here talking about it. But for, your average player.
Also, but that's what I'm saying. For the average player that decides to leave the game, what is going to fix that issue is not the end game, it's the metagame. That's my point. So, anyone else on the metagame? Foxy, Shlomi?
Yeah.
Foxy, go ahead.
I think, to be honest, I don't care about the end game at all. At least not right now. I'm happy to have my tier 10 and just spam tier 10 all day long, or as long as I can till I have to farm low tier to get more silver. If that's still the case, I don't know actually. I don't have tier 10 units in the tests so far, so I can't comment on that. But I'm happy just obliterating everyone in tier 10 matches. That's fun. I don't need ranked. It's fun to have, but like Astolfo said, it's like, if it's good, is it bad for arena? We don't know. Maybe later. But I think, to be honest, we need some kind of metagame, like missions, like all the stuff that we already said. But I think we won't get it now, and not in the near future. I think all the system designers are busy doing new factions and new units and stuff like that, and they don't have the time to actually like create a new system for I don't know, like missions or dailies or whatever you want to call your metagame, or what you want to make your metagame out of. So yeah, I think we have to wait a long time before we see like any major announcements or like even like experiments.
Okay, here I'm gonna disagree with you, because first, it's usually different people that do that sort of stuff. So people who create new factions, balance the units and the game mode itself, are usually different people than those who develop features like in metagame. And we've already seen them doing something towards that. We have those daily missions right now. You have the pool of 12 missions and you get 4 missions every day. And then you get some silver, free XP, sometimes the unit XP tokens as well, and commander trial tokens. In some missions even give you 1 day of premium. So yeah, they've already started doing something towards that. It's just not much yet. But yeah, especially judging by the fact that they have already started doing something, I'll say that we can easily expect more in that regard in the closest future, in the next few patches. And Shlomi, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I was wanting to add to what Foxy said earlier. If they start too late, they're gonna risk the game dying again, basically, because if people reach the spot where they're in the game and they're just judging by what they already achieved, they're like, okay, I'm grinding units to grind other units, to buy new commanders, to grind them. It circles around and people can lose interest, so they need to start really early, bringing some sort of events, more engaging missions, because the missions we have right now is play the game but differently a bit and get 1,000 silver. Here you are. It's a good start, don't get me wrong, but it's not really engaging, and obviously at some point they'll have to deal with customization options, cosmetics, and all that. But right now it's a very straight path. Even with the skill point system they introduced, it's even more clear what currency used for what. And I think it could have a sort of bore out if they don't get on the topic sooner than later.
Yeah, in terms of those daily missions, I do agree they were kind of shitty, both in terms of rewards and what you actually had to do complete the mission. That definitely needs to be looked into, and well, I have a lot of feedback about that, but I'm going to skip it for the time being. It's also pretty obvious. Let's just move on to another issue for the time's sake. So, Shlomi, what is your issue? What do you need to fix? What do you need to get right?
Okay. There's some topics when it comes to technical issues in a greater scale. First one is obviously accessibility. thanks to some good videos and some good guidance, there's a workaround to actually play the game in English. But as for the launcher, for the website, everything, they should really get on and make this accessible to the majority of people without using workarounds and form a player base. That's really, again, rather sooner than later. And when they start new tests, they really get their shit together in regards of how they deal with patches. I get that from Europe, I get very low rates, apparently, the bandwidth to download the patch extremely low, but shipping another patch shortly before the test, even especially if the download rate is that low, that's just, it comes off as a bit unprofessional, and I think they need to deal with such issues. When it comes to the game itself, obviously servers are somewhere in China. Lag is an issue, especially for anyone who needs to charge, but just as well for archers and for every unit. You need to time your stuff, and I myself played on 300 plus MS, so yeah, gets kind of hard. Maybe if they want to expand, put a server in Europe, put one server in the US, and you can expand there. Apart from that, and I'm going to leave out the first day problems with commanders not unlocking after the battle or not leaving the battle. If you keep the private lobby feature, you should really fix it. The private matches didn't work properly. They ended early. They destroyed what I think was one of the most engaging and most professional matches I saw during the tests. And obviously, everybody or almost everybody had to deal with connection issues during those private lobbies, which was, as far as I know, not so bad in normal games. For me, I only disconnected for like 3 seconds one time. But if you ship a game, if you test it, these are all issues that shouldn't really be happening at the point when this game is in like third instance.
Okay, well, let me start with, for example, the generals, right, that you mentioned, that they weren't returning. That stuff is also obviously quite frustrating, and it's a very basic issue that happens to a lot of people that absolutely needs to get fixed, and that actually doesn't have to do with servers being in China or whatever, right? They just get stuck because some, well, maybe server side or game side issues, we don't know, but stuff like that, like, yeah, come on guys, it's about time you finally fix it. I mean, it was okay in the past, so that is most likely, because of the new environment. Previously, it was the Wargaming, ID. They had their own accounts, their own servers, so the game needed to work with this. Now it's new NetEase launcher, NetEase accounts, NetEase servers, so they need to change something in the game to work with this new environment. So they have managed to fix it in the past. They will need to fix it again. But, well, I'm pretty sure they will do it sooner or later, and, well, the sooner the better, because that's just frustrating. But, yeah, it was mostly gone. It was just, well, we had to wait like 30 seconds after the battle for a commander to get back, after the initial first day issues, so they managed to fix that, for the most part, so that's good. But yeah, a lot of issues that you've described. Well, okay. First of all, the servers are Chinese, and we are not going to get NA servers or EU servers if the game is not going to be released in the West. And for that, well, we first need to convince CA that there still is a sizable audience for the game in the West. And, well, here is, the community. They have to do that by playing the game when it is online, showing them, because they definitely have data like that, to see how big of a percentage base, or just number wise, how big of a player base is of the West compared to Chinese, and also how big of an engagement with Arena is also outside of the game itself, right? So, for example, how many people are watching videos, streams, etc., because then that also drives the community forward and sales forward most of all, which is what CA sadly is going to be interested in the most. But well, that's just how companies and the world works, so nothing to really complain about here. But like those basic issues definitely need to be ironed out, because that just contributes to the game. Again, that's the main theme of this section, are just not feeling right, not feeling smooth. And all those issues will just turn players away from the game if one of the first contacts they have with the game is, well, not fun, riddled with bugs, and all kinds of other issues. So yeah, I'll just emphasize it again that they need to get those things right before the next big step, before the release, definitely, to keep the players engaged and not leave the game. Okay, anyone? Thoughts on the servers, connectivity issues, or launcher? No?
Okay. George. Sorry.
I'll speak about the launcher then, since I kind of forgot about that. I was one of the lucky ones that, well, luckily for me, everything just worked. So I followed the instruction or just found a way myself and then created an instruction for other people in the form of my videos. But yeah, there was a lot of people coming to our Discord server asking for help and like, hey, I'm doing everything as you say in your guide, right? I follow your instructions, but I get this kind of error, I get this kind of error. It's like, how the hell do I fix it? And we as a community in the West, right, gather around our Discord, we're able to fix all of those issues, find some workarounds, like, okay, you do this. I don't know, for example, there was a ID window that popped up where they ask you for ID and you have to close it. But for some people, like the X just wasn't there and the window was bugged. And then figure out, okay, make sure you're focused on that window in your windows, right? And then Alt F4, maybe once, maybe twice, because for some people once didn't work but twice did. Or just spam it until it works. And there were other issues that we managed to fix, but there were some issues that we just were helpless against because, well, we are not technical support. We don't know how this thing works, right? And it's just difficult for us to provide help. And yeah, a lot of people from the West that wanted to play the game just couldn't. So they need to definitely iron out that as well, because that is, well, the very barrier of entry. If you're not able to install the game, you're not going to play it. So yeah, they definitely need to look into that. And that is kind of more on the NetEase side. I guess they are the ones developing the launcher and all the patch deployment system and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's actually on NetEase to look into that, I imagine. Okay, George, let's start with you. What did you want to say about it?
I mean, I just wanted to say that obviously it's a key feature for us, but if you're trying to market towards that like Chinese audience, then issues like the language and the connectivity to the service it's not an issue for obviously Chinese people. And so whether they decide it to be a focus or not, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, it's important to us as all Western audience people. But in my opinion, it can wait. You know, it's not like the game's unplayable. Yeah, it's quite annoying, the connectivity especially. But at the end of the day, I would rather have some of these features and balances to make it more attractive to the Chinese audience first, personally, because otherwise I don't think we can get very far.
Yeah, we definitely need to come to terms with. Whoops, sorry, my microphone was muted. We definitely need to come to terms with, you know, the Chinese side of things, where a lot of things will be in Chinese and just in Chinese. And the official information we were getting before we actually got to play Arena for the first time on the NetEase launcher was that the game is not going to be available in English. And then it apparently turned out the game is not going to be available in English, wink wink, right? So it is still a nice gesture from CA and NetEase to, you know, to gently allow the Western fan base to still play the game without larger issues. The issues we're talking right now are mostly technical and just, it's not out of their ill will. If anything, it's just ill preparation. So that is something that they need to fix, but it's not like they're actively trying to prevent us from playing the game. As well, technically they should, right? Because China and their laws, right? So yeah, they're actually doing pretty well by the community itself. So I'll give them that bonus. But yeah, the official release is in China, or if we want to call it a release, but it is published right now in China. And just the fact that we are able to play without larger issues, but there's still quite a lot of them, still pretty nice. Astolfo?
I was gonna go last. I wasn't gonna have much to say. If Fox has something to say.
Well, I have to agree with Mishtru. Actually, like, we can only be happy that we can play right now. The ping is not going to get better unless they have dedicated servers in Europe and North America, for example. So we have to live with that. It's not too bad. I think the launcher is the biggest issue right now for us Western people. Maybe it's in general in China as well. Maybe they just didn't have the capacity and the servers were overloaded sometimes, because sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, depending on the time of day. So maybe it's just a huge storm of people in China that wanted to play the game, or the server is just not powerful enough for the logging services. We don't know. So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, in terms of the technical issues, right, it's not like they were experienced just by the Western audience, the Western players. They happen to everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really talk with Chinese players, but it's just a fair assumption, right? If we had some issues with the launcher itself, where the download was bugged or whatever. Actually, no, because they have published an article on their website about how to fix some of those problems, right? They released an article where they gave workarounds around some of the issues. So it's pretty much confirmed that Chinese players also had those issues. Or maybe they just released it for the Western audience. I imagine us being far away from the servers and having some worse connection is a slight factor contributing to, those problems occurring more often on our side. But it's not like it's Western specific.
Yeah.
And Astolfo?
Okay,
Foxy?
I have, for example, 180 ping, and it's playable. Like, obviously it's not perfect, but it's good enough, I guess.
Yeah, especially for the situation we are right now. Okay, Astolfo, closing thoughts?
I agree with what everyone said. I think, sadly, this is not a Western game anymore, even though we would like it to be. It's not. We have to deal with the ping. The ping is what it is. They're not going to move servers over here. It's just not something a business would do. And as much as it hurts, because you guys play at 180, I play somewhere between 480 and 600. I definitely notice it, but again, I can't expect them to change that. And I'm honestly just glad that they are giving us some workarounds to let me play it in English, to let me play their game at all, honestly, because again, it's not ours anymore.
Okay, so let's move on to, also again, the last person, Astolfo. What, in your opinion, they need to fix before the next step?
So my discussion topic is balance. Pretty much every unit type that you guys want to talk about, you can talk about. We did go into elephants quite a bit and heavy artillery. So if you talk about that, try and keep it a little brief. And then towards the end, we'll do new factions, which one you either think they'll do or which one you'd like to see, honestly. Either or. You don't have to pick one or the other. But to start, I would say that the balancing of the game it's not bad. It's, things can be changed here and there. And I don't know how much of it is ping. For example, pikes. When I was playing pikes or playing against pikes, a ping delay is huge, right? I don't know if the guy has his unit in phalanx or not, and I could run right into it, or I could run into a guy and drop phalanx, and he doesn't even know I dropped phalanx. Does that make pikes OP? No, it doesn't. Pikes are, pikes. They should do that, right? But anyway, what are you guys thinking? I guess I'll start with Mistru.
Oh, thank you for putting me on the spot. Yeah, in terms of pikes, I think we should put the ping and connectivity issues out of the equation, because that's not a balancing factor. That's just a totally separate issue. And yeah, pikes are broken because of many other things. They are just sometimes just too good at too many things. It's very difficult to flank them, especially when they can just, do some bullshit maneuvers in literally gluing themselves to the wall, dealing still shit ton of damage, being unable to flank, being unable to be routed. The control they exert over the capture points or any area they're in is also very strong. And there's very little you can do against them. And those issues were there in the wargaming version, and it still persists until this version. And now they are maybe even more amplified because of the new game mode. So I think, also to add to that, right, pikes have underwent huge changes towards the end of the wargaming era, right? A few of the last patches were entirely or maybe mostly focused on changing and reworking the pikes. So, well, CA kind of agrees that pikes have to be reworked, and I think they largely reverted the changes they made for the Chinese release. Probably, to go back to what they know sort of worked, right? But it had a lot of issues and still has. But to go back to a more stable pike build, to allow us to focus more on testing the new game mode itself. And also, in the previous podcast about the first test and our feedback about it, we talked a lot about the new game mode, right? And we didn't really touch the balance, and the consensus was like, yeah, balance, it's what we know, right? And it's not that bad. It's pretty good, actually. But now, kind of the honeymoon phase ended, right? And we've got to spend more time with the game, and some of the issues that keep persisting since wargaming, some even from Steam, they start getting to you again. It's like, hey, Arena is back, right? It's like, oh, Arena is back, and the issues are also back. And that's why we are here now talking about them. So yeah, Elephants of Artillery, we touched on them before. In my opinion, still broken, still need some fixing, as do need a lot of things. But I'm not going to go into too much details about it. I'll leave the functions for later. So
I was kind of hoping you would talk about cavalry a little bit, since you're a resident range player here, but I guess we'll move on and see if someone else touches it. Shlomi, what are your thoughts?
Okay, let me touch on that, right? I've talked about cavalry and range mostly in the previous podcast as well, and how that relates to the new game mode, because that's what it mostly relates as well. If we're talking about just the unit balance itself, yeah, they're mostly okay. It's just how they play around the new game mode.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's part of what makes cavalry so strong right now. And infantry on a little bit of a weaker side when you compare it to something like pikes. But Shlomi, what do you think about the balance of the game currently in units?
Well, I think highly specialized units are kind of the meta right now. And you can balance this out a bit by either making more room for counterplay to those units, like make their weaknesses bigger, so to say, or by buffing out those not so specialized units, just like common infantry. But I prefer to have more room for counterplay. That's surely a way to go. Just like with pikes, they seem super strong, shield bash, drop the pikes, and kill anything within seconds. It's too easy to not do, and you don't always have dogs around, and even those get a shield to their face. So yeah. And when it comes to cavalry, this was just something I observed when casting the show matches. Very mobile units like foxes kind of seem to going more and more into the niche that cavalry should fill. So I'm not. I think cavalry is still very, very strong. Maybe because of mobility reasons, the strongest right now in the meta. But I feel like units like foxes are a strong second, but are very much in the same niche.
I would agree with that. I think, Falksy's topic, unit speed, is in most games, and true to this game, unit speed dictates what fights you can and can't take and where you kind of stack up in the meta. And speed is king to a lot of people. George, what do you think about balance and unit
So
types?
if I could touch on that, right? About what Shlomi mentioned, Folks is kind of becoming more prominent. What I've noticed and what I think about it is that, those units are not necessarily unbalanced in the light of the new game mode, is that the playstyle changes so much because of the new game mode. And it's just like the meta adjustment period, where players need some time to figure out what works, what doesn't, and how to play around new objectives. And yeah, we definitely saw the rise of cavalry in the first test, but by the end of the second test, cavalry kind of fell off, right? Folks rose a little bit to be more prominent. Archers kind of returned to the to favor. I got some parties where I had actual good protection, where I just wasn't left alone all the time and just getting charged all over the place. When I had a few reliable players around me who could actually defend me, archers can still do well in the new meta. So it's not like they're completely out as well. And so units like elephants, pikes, artillery, and maybe some other unit types, they need balancing themselves, and the other will just wait how the meta shapes around them and how the players create the meta themselves.
I agree with that. I think, for example, like you said, archers are, they're not any weaker than they were. It's just people aren't playing around them like they used to because the game mode changed. But I think you summed it up great, George. What are your thoughts on balance and unit types?
I think balance is obviously a difficult issue to solve because there's so many different units, the unit types even, and obviously the way that people play these units changes. The role that Falx is, like people have already brought up, Falx has played a much more cavalry-like role recently, and so they need a balance in their own right compared to if they were balanced before for their sort of previous role. And I think it's obviously a difficult and important issue, which makes it very challenging, but also very key. It's difficult to point out specific units because each unit they can feel overpowered in sort of their own right, if they're in their own sort of situation. So I feel like we already mentioned about elephants, obviously pikes. I think you can make an argument for pretty much any unit being overpowered in certain scenarios, and so I believe that properly more testing is sort of required to see where people go with this new game mode, and once people have actually experimented in what becomes those sort of meta picks unit wise, commander wise, I just think there's so many little nuances that still need to be found out before we can make big claims about balancing, apart from things like, heavy artillery kills fun, or elephants need to nerf because they do too much damage or something. I think getting into specifics is very difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, like you said, units always shine in their own regard, right? For example, during the show matches, I know a lot of people were playing Falxes instead of infantry. I think I and one other person was the only person who played infantry, and the rest of people played pikes or Falxes out of a full lobby. Does that mean infantry is weak? No. I mean, I did a great job once I was actually able to get on a flag because they play differently, right? They have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think, again, like you said, we just need a lot more data before we, slap something OP or underpowered, especially when you're looking at, something example of archers, right? I mean, archers should die to a cavalry charge. Does that mean cavalry's OP? Not necessarily. I mean, could they be protected better by their teammates? Yes. Did they used to be? Yes. Anyone else have any thoughts on George's comment before I move on to
Falx?
I'd
just like to finish it off, like what I was saying, because I thought you added some good points. Like, Maestri plays a lot of range. He's probably more likely to say that
I'm a cavalry player now. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, well, so exactly, right? So, but people that used to play ranged, or people that still do play ranged, I'm not going to throw around names in case I get it wrong. That now they might be they're more likely to say that cavalry's very overpowered and my archers keep on getting one shot and that. But we have to look at again why they're getting into that situation of being one hit. Is it simply this cavalry's overpowered and can't be stopped by anything, and all it does is just run down one flank and nothing can stop it? It just kills everything in its path, or is this archer player or range slinger player or whatever getting one hit because they're just not being protected by their team? It's easy to throw around accusations, but to actually have something to back that up is another thing.
Okay, so I want to add to what George said. I really like the argument about the roles they need to perform on the battlefield and how they changed because of the new game mode. And if this game mode is, the main game mode, the flag premier game mode for the game going forward, I think the balance needs to be adjusted to how the roles of the unit have been adjusted. So how now units that can control the area and stay on point, quite literally on the capture point, right, are more prominent. I think that's why we see the rises of Folks, because they combine both the staying power of an infantry unit and the speed of a cavalry unit. Obviously, they're not as fast as cavalry, but they're not as weak as cavalry in holding the points. They're kind of in the golden middle in that regard. And also because of the fall from the grace of the ranged units, which are one of their main counters, since the range presence is largely reduced, Folks is also, because of that, rise to power. And there's just shift in the meta because of that. And if that is the main game mode moving forward, maybe the balance needs to be adjusted and looked into based on the new roles. So if Folks are really good at the key tasks that need to be performed, key roles that need to be performed in the game itself, in the battle itself, then maybe they should be nerfed according to that, right? Because since they're very good at the very important thing, well, maybe just nerf some of their aspects so that they're balanced and not one of the best unit types, right? Same with elephants, same with archers, same with any other unit type.
So, Shlomi, Folks, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's about balance in a whole. The problem is we only have a blind pick feature. You can see what your team, your group is playing, but you won't know what at least 16 other players in the game are going to play. And by that logic, you will always, or will most of the time, face the problem that you might have not the counter pick for some units. And that's something that really needs to get addressed in that sense, because if there's nothing that can touch you, you're free to do what you want, and a lot of units can really get into that positions.
I mean, the only way to fix that is just better matchmaking, and that will be able to create more balanced teams, which also maybe helped by just having a larger player base. But other than that, like if you want to go into radical solutions such as, I don't know, like selection mode,
a pre-game lobby.
Once you have, private lobby is a separate thing. Yeah, but it's sort of like in League of Legends, right? In League of Legends you have only one map, right? In the new game mode, main game mode. But yeah, you have the pick phase, right? So something like pick phase in Arena, I don't think it has a place in a game mode we have. So yeah, the only way is just better matchmaking, and that's it. We shouldn't dwell too much onto it. Although matchmaking can be one of those things that need to get improved before the release, right? Because you don't want to, people also will feel it's like, oh, I've lost this match because matchmaking was absolute shit, right? My team was full of tier 5s and 4s, and the enemy team was full of 6 and 7s, right? And then they get salty because of that. And that makes them feel bad and possibly quit the game. And this is what we were talking about in this segment.
I can agree with that. If they do ever go down another type of game mode, for example, a ranked thing, I think a pre-game lobby might be beneficial for that. But for how it's currently set up, I agree. There's not much, to have a 2-minute pregame lobby while everyone locks in their picks might be excessive for what arena is. How about you, Fox? Any ideas on balance or unit types, or what should be buffed, not buffed, whatever your thoughts are on it?
Well, to be honest, I think it's in a pretty good spot. I think we are a little bit biased in terms of what units should be balanced and which shouldn't, because we kind of measure the balance by how we play the game in private lobbies and like show matches and tournaments, where it's like completely different in terms of communication, like the communication between the players on each side. You don't have that in public matches or like in public ranked matches, even if we get to that point. And I mean, some unit types like Roman infantry, for example, I think it's not really getting picked very often in matches like those that we did, because they really don't have a purpose in the game right now. Really, they just I mean, like Roman infantry is like a good buffer. They excel when you like go in, fight the match, like a skirmish for a long time. But in like our private lobbies, it's not about like a drawn out fight. We want to encircle an enemy, flank them, break up their ranks, everything that we can to win the tournament or the show match or whatever it is. So obviously we will pick units that excel at that. And we kind of lose the focus on like what the game really is about right now, which is only quick matches, like public matches. And in those, you still see a lot of Roman infantry because they have a purpose there, I guess. So it's really hard to actually say what is unbalanced and what is not unbalanced. In my opinion, pikes are fine. In my opinion, every unit is kind of fine. Sure, there are some minor stat changes that would be appreciated, but it's not. I don't feel like it's really needed to change any unit a lot at the moment. But I think that's also because I only play Foxes and I can choose my engagements. Like if I have a free hand on the battlefield, I can do whatever I want to do. But if someone wants to pin me down, I'm fucked. So just choosing the engagements is also a big part. But I'm not sure. I don't think anything is really unbalanced at the moment. I haven't really seen a lot of Slinger players, I have to say. So I'm not sure if they are good or bad right now. I think there was one enemy player who was shooting me. I died, obviously. But it still took some time. It wasn't too bad. Archers are easily avoidable right now. If they hit you, obviously it's bad. Javelins I haven't seen at all, really. Only in the show matches that we did, or like in a pre-made squad in public matches. But I haven't seen a lot of them. So it's really hard to say. Maybe just we need more games or like more matches to play to have a more definite picture of what is going on. But right now, at least from my perspective, from a Fox player perspective, it's like everything is fine.
Okay, let me disagree here with you, Polixi. In terms of that, units are overall fine, and no, not of the units really needs adjustment. I still think that we need some larger reworks for pikes, artillery, and possibly elephants. And other units also need slight adjustments. And in our first podcast about Arena coming back, and which was also very similar in the tone of this segment about what they need to get right this time around, Mongoose focused on the balance, and he raised a really good compelling argument that every single successful game of that type balances the game from the perspective of the highest level of play. Because if the game is balanced for the highest level of play, it will overall be well balanced. And if you balance the game for the noobs, as in you buff, for example, units that are difficult to play, right, then you completely fuck over the balance for anyone who is above average skill level. So for example, let's say cavalry is more difficult to play than infantry, right? And because of that, noobs struggle to play cavalry, so you buff cavalry so that noobs that play cavalry can be, on an okay power level. But then everyone who is good at playing cavalry will absolutely obliterate everything. And that's why you balance the game for the highest level of play, not the lowest or not the average. It's always the highest that is the way to go in this regard.
I would actually, I agree with both of you in your own regard, but looking at something, for example, like League of Legends, I know a lot of people have an issue with the fact that they do balance around the LCS because, 95% of players in League are not, diamond, master, challenger level players. And, I would say any average player with enough practice could get platinum pretty easily in League. And so I don't know if you choose to balance around what you think everyone could achieve or what you balance around the absolute highest. It's an interesting argument either way. I think for a game that has a struggling player base, unlike League of Legends, which clearly doesn't, I think you kind of do have to balance your game more towards Falks' argument of balancing towards, I would say, the peak point of an average player instead of, I would say us. We are probably the top 5% of players in the arena. So I don't know if you want to balance your game based on that or not. I will let you guys reply to this, either anyone here. But would anyone like to speak up about that point specifically?
Actually, kinda, yeah. I think the biggest problem with balancing, like what to balance towards, is usually wrong for most companies that do develop games. They always go for like the numbers and stuff like that, which makes sense for, I don't know, StarCraft competitive or League of Legends or stuff like that. But for a game like Arena, I think they should balance around having fun, basically. Like if it's not fun to play pikes because their phalanx movement is kind of clunky and stuff like that, they should fix that, and the unit will be better because of that, because it's more, the unit coherence is better, and also you will be less frustrated with playing that unit. So I think that should be the main focus right now, like the first points that we started on with the broadcast.
Yeah, okay, but that's kind of nothing to do with the balance, Foxy. You're kind of off in here. Anyway, let's move forward. Definitely, let's move forward. Let's talk about last point in balance after we finished the Astolfo mini show. I wanted to briefly touch on the maps. So we've noticed that we have only 5 maps in the pool right now to play. And I do hope that means that they have withdrawn the maps from the map pool in order to rework them. Some of the maps desperately needed a rework, and now even more so because of the new game mode. So yeah, I hope that they balance it and they have a better design philosophy when it comes to the maps. And let's move on to the future possibilities. When do you guys think the next test will be? My guess is 31st of June. Foxy?
Yes, very good. Mark it in your calendars.
Yes. Foxy, when do you think the next test is going to happen?
Hopefully tonight in like 20 minutes, so I can play some Total War Arena.
Mm-hmm.
But
And what kind of the test do you think it will be? There will be a big step forward with new factions released, or
No.
will be just a small improvement?
I think they what they should do are small incremental improvements. Like what they have done basically, just make small improvements, see how they work out in like a couple of days of testing, and get the feedback in, rework what has been done well and what hasn't been done well, and just small improvements. Because if you hammer the player base with big patches with not much playtime in between, for us it's none because the servers aren't up. It's really hard to give actually feedback on like any specific thing that they have changed if it's just too big and too wild, I guess. So I hope they will do small incremental improvements over the test phases that they have planned, if there are more. And obviously, I hope that they will announce a test phase soon. I hope, like 31st of June would be nice. Could be a good date for them to do that.
So it's still 1.5 months away. But anyway, about the feedback and us being able or not able to provide that feedback, this podcast is kind of the very solution to that, right? We focus the feedback, although maybe not in a very focused way, since we are already talking for 2 hours, but it is one place where we gather the feedback, right? So now, question to the viewers, if they're still listening, go to the comments, provide your feedback there, either about what we talked about or just any other thing you want, really. And then, I can just show this video to CA and I'll be like, please watch it. They won't. They possibly will read the comments, right? So the viewers, pretty much the entire player base, thanks to that podcast, thanks to that video, will be able to have their voice maybe not heard, but at least listened to, which is different. Okay, going back to the next test, George, when do you think it will be and what kind of the test it will be?
Well, I hope that it's soon for my own sake, because obviously I want to play the game. I'd like to see a test in June. That'd be very nice. And I expect if there is a test in June, I'm not 100% sure how likely that would be. But if there is a test sometime in June, then I think it would be a small one. Although I do certainly see the want from like a developer or publisher side to sort of get a new faction in here or get something to spark it, because obviously you've got players like us that we're going to play it irrelevant, right? Like if the next patch is small or big, we're still going to play it. Whereas for newer players, that they might not, they might eventually get bored of this sort of thing, a small change. Well, I don't really want the tweaks, I want something new. Then I can definitely see a push from a publisher side to want to get something new into the game. But I think only time will tell.
Astolfo?
For me personally, I'm gonna look at it more of like a business perspective, a bit like George did. I'm gonna say you're gonna need the new faction to bring new people, right? And let's say if the faction is China, because Three Kingdoms, it was very popular. That's why they're releasing the game there. Then you will get a huge spark of marketing interest, right? I think a problem with that is if you, like Falksy said, you make a huge change like that with no testing and they're just absolutely broken like Carthage was, that's a huge issue. When I think the next test will be probably around the 30th of June.
You mean 31st?
Yeah, sure. 31st of June.
Yes.
And I think it'll be a small test. I think it should be a small test, and it should be a small test of the new faction. Honestly, I would probably disable some of the other factions, or I would run a 2-day period of only infantry testing, a 2-day period of only cavalry testing. I don't know how you could do it. You could do it a lot of different ways. All units, just there needs to be a short test just for the new faction. And then I think they really should think about moving into an open alpha or a beta, or however they want to word it. Because, again, this game's been in development for so long, at some point, it needs to start moving forward in its life cycle.
And Shlomi?
Well, my guess is as good as anyone, so I'm going to go with early July, just to be the odd man out. And I really hope they get into a more regular cycle. We know just like the first weekend every month will be tests, or every second month, and we can kind of look forward to the next increment of the test and go ahead with it. Just have fun and plan when we're gonna make time for it.
So for me, judging from how different patch policies have went for them in the past. I definitely preferred how the game was moving forward when there was one big patch every month, every 2 months between that period of time, rather than when they switched to constant updates because they thought that is a good idea. And they were like, hey, from this point onward, there will be a patch every 2 weeks, like no matter what. For me, that was a really bad decision, and they should definitely have not done that. And I hope they will learn from that, because that's, I think, partially why the game died. They were unable to do those big, more impactful steps because of the new patch policy. Just kind of pushed things out. Not really a fan of that. I don't know, how it worked really internally, but that's how it felt to me as a customer and a player of the game. So yeah, I do definitely hope that they're gonna do next test will be something big. We had a tier 10 test in the past that was really interesting, so that's one way to go. But in terms of faction, they could release. I mean, if you release a new faction, it's going to make some fuss, whether you like it or not, and depends on you, really. I mean, by you, NetEase, right, and CA, how much they want to hype it up. They might just release the faction silently, right? And just, okay, next test is going to be new faction, but we are not going to do a big deal about it, and we are going to do a big deal about it later on. But that will be kind of weird. But it is one possible solution. Yes, Foxy, I know. Sorry. So yeah, that is kind of a minefield they're stepping on right now. It is difficult to find the perfect solution in terms of marketing and the game balance, etc., etc. But can you guys stop? So in terms of see, now I lost my train of thought because of you interrupting me. So
We try.
yes, thank you. I'll just move forward since you guys completely fucked me over. Fuck you for that.
Why do you read Discord?
Because it's right in front of my eyes. And you're distracting me in the middle of me talking.
Me and Falks are just flirting in the background. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
I just saw the comment that we are hitting 90 minutes, and I thought you just wrote that.
Yeah,
so I said,
fuck
we are 2
you.
hours.
Shut up, please. Very kindly, okay? Going back, and no, I am not going to edit it out. Shlomi, thank you for interrupting me again. Now I have to scroll up to see the list. Fine, let's move forward on to... okay, so what I want to say is that regardless of when the next test is going to be, I hope that there is going to be some kind of a test going on. I should really remember that. 6th of August. That is going to be 10th anniversary of SUNTZU. SUNTZU is going to hit 10 years. Hey! So yeah, I hope that Arena will be online during that time, so that we can do something special with it. And well, if Arena won't be online at that time, we are just going to do on the closest available date, I guess. We'll see about that. But overall, I think that they should do less tests, that implement bigger changes, and whether they do like silent releases of the patch. Hey, I finally remember what I wanted to say. So yeah, like if they release a new faction silently or not, I think they should do a big deal about it anyway, and just make sure they properly test it internally, and I hope they will be able to do it. They failed with Carthage, right? But well, maybe they have learned. Maybe the new faction is not going to feature such a difficult to balance unit type as elephants, so it is not going to be that rough. And obviously you cannot test a faction in just against itself. It's about how it fits into the larger picture, so you need to test it with other units, with other factions. Yeah, so I think they're completely completely capable of releasing a new faction, doing some bigger deal about it in the next test or any future test to come, and do it right, you know? Get both the balancing right first time out of the gate and combined with good marketing around it and hyping it up. Whether it's going to signify like a bigger release, change from alpha to beta or closed beta to open beta or whatever, that is up to them. But I think they are capable of doing that. I hope I just want to encourage them to do it right. So now we've talked about next faction coming up with a test. So your guesses on what the next faction is going to be, Folksy?
Well, there are some hints here and there, like what the people are talking about. I don't know. I really hope for Vikings. I would really love to see Vikings. But obviously, Three Kingdoms was really nice. And so maybe we see a Chinese faction. Or didn't they promise a Japanese faction at some point during the wargaming era? I think they did. I'm not sure. But
yes,
I hope for Vikings. Yeah, okay. But I really hope for Vikings. Like, new factions are nice at all, but I don't really care that much about like which faction is the next faction, as long as there are new factions. But like Vikings would interest me.
Okay, George, what is going to be the next faction?
China.
Okay, he leaves it at that. Astolfo?
Honestly, I don't care. I'm more interested in new generals, maybe a new faction, but just new stuff. I'd love new generals though.
Yeah, new commanders definitely would be sweet to one of the existing factions. Shlomi, next faction though?
I also gonna go with China.
Okay, yeah. I would definitely like to see Parmenion, but just saying, rework of Greek commanders, but we're gonna leave it for another podcast maybe. In terms of the next faction, while China is kind of obvious, I think that, again, from business perspective, they should keep China for later and release a different faction before China. And that different faction for me would be Persia. That's what they should go with to hype it up a little bit, because they need some bigger push right now. I feel like it, to hype it up a little bit. For, I don't know, right now we are in closed alpha. Let's say we are in closed alpha. So when they move into closed beta, that is going to be signified by the release of Persia. And then when you move from closed beta to open beta, that's when they release China. And that's when they do like really, really, really big marketing push to get as many people as possible, because the combination of the game going open beta and them releasing China, especially since the game is published in China, right? That is just the perfect timing. But instead of waiting for China to be the next new faction, the first new faction to appear since Carthage, to wait for whenever the open beta may come, right? That may be too long. Although there are rumors that maybe the very next test is going to be the open beta, but I somehow doubt it. Really, really doubt it. But may happen, and then it may be China. We'll see. Speaking of open beta, do you think the next test is going to be released, or do you think the release is going to happen later? And if later, then when? Folksy?
I think we're quite far from a release, actually. Like, I mean, I don't really know NetEase, like which games they have done. I know they did Diablo Megalol Mobile. So, but we haven't seen that games, and it has been like announced, I believe, like 2 or 3 years ago. It still hasn't come out in the West. I'm not sure about China itself. So I don't really know what the release quality, let's say, of a NetEase game is, like when they want to release it. But I think it will be quite some time, like maybe a year from now, I would guess.
And George?
It would make sense to have a small, not a release next patch kind of thing. And I think that's most sensible in my eyes, and hopefully from a business perspective as well. If you want to make a big release, you want to get that big release right. So probably iron out some of the smaller things first. So I believe it will be relatively small. I do quite like your point. I hadn't quite thought about like a small faction just to see the interest and leave China back. That's a possibility. But I don't know. I'm gonna go for small patch, small faction, small patch, China, something. I don't know, something like that. That would make sense in my eyes.
Astolfo?
I don't know what CA's financials on Arena looks like, but this game's been dragging its feet for a long time now. I realistically think it should release probably into open beta by the end of the year. As unrealistic as that is to expect it to release, let's say first quarter of 2021. I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't think their team's big enough. I don't think they get enough support from CA. But I realistically think that's where the game needs to be. It's if they go back into their old thing of let's say they released Persia, right? What is there going to be another 3 years of testing between that and China? Like, no offense, but I mean, I'm a diehard fan of this game, and I've got about a year left in me of following it.
If it doesn't pick up speed. Okay, Shlomi?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Astolfo. I think the next test might be too early, but I really hope that we're getting an open beta towards the end of the year, and maybe with a lot of support, CA gives more resources to this project. I really hope so.
Yeah, for me, they should really go like YOLO mid-rush style. And obviously YOLO mid-rush, as everyone should know, is not just pointlessly rushing forward. It's all about high-level coordination, doing everything right at the right time. It is one of the most difficult things to pull off in Total War Arena, a correct YOLO mid-rush. But yeah, if CA only actually sees the potential and stops shooting itself in the foot in terms of Arena and not investing in the project properly, and finally believing in itself and in what it has created, and just properly do things this time around, finally. I would expect, as I said earlier, right, Persia would be going from closed alpha to closed beta, then China would be the release of open beta, and then hopefully full release combined with maybe return to the West would be when they release Japan. They promised Japan, as Foxy mentioned earlier, but it did also mention that Japan is like 2-3 other factions away from being released. So they're going to release 2 or 3 factions before they even release Japan. And yeah, Japan has a lot of global love in all of us weebs. So yeah, combining Japanese faction release together with bringing the game back to the West and fully releasing it to China, and that's the point where also the West gets a really polished product straight out of the gate for many of us, or for many of those who will be returning. They'll say, holy shit, 3 new factions, so many improvements, new game mode, wow. Well, they still probably check the game out on YouTube in the meantime, but for them, it will be a huge jump, a leap in the quality of gameplay and the game itself between when they last played in Wargaming and when they're going to get back into the game in the West, on the Western servers. And speaking of that, since I already gave my idea on the Western release, in terms of time frame itself, right? So yeah, I would expect going from closed alpha to closed beta very quickly, very soon. Very possibly the very next test, right? It was the technical alpha. They even called Pioneer Test 2 out of 2 on their website. So that kind of hints at that being the last technical alpha test. They've tested the new game mode, got a lot of feedback about it, already made some adjustments to it. Next step is closed beta and some big changes. Also, even advertising this next test, right? I mean, the second test that we had, they advertised that a new faction is going to show up together with that test. It didn't. So, yeah, maybe that was because of coronavirus delays and all that stuff. But by the next test, they should have a new faction ready and it should go into closed beta. Then open beta follows closely after, a few months, a few tests after closed beta happens, because let's face it, they have pretty much everything ready already. All it needs is just some polishing, right? And whatever the new faction introduces, some adjustments on that as well, and it will be fine. And yeah, huge marketing push, because then that will be when China releases, and then hopefully it succeeds and we get full release by the end of the game of the year, not just the open beta in China. But yeah, we'll see about that. Might be a few months off, but yeah, let's be optimistic about that. At least I'm staying. So come back to the West, guys. When this is going to happen? Not if, when. Folksy.
To be honest, I don't think it will be in the near future. It all depends on the success in it in China, obviously, but you have to consider also politics in that, and that's the podcast is not about politics, so I really can't put like a timestamp on it when or even if, but I would guess not sooner than 2 years from now, or even 3.
Ooh, that's rough. Okay, George.
Well, again, putting a timestamp on it is difficult. It's more like it depends how successful it is. Depending on that's sort of going to be the reason that you would want to bring it back to the West, right? Obviously, I feel like hopefully that will be sooner. The more Western people are playing the game, but also the more like Chinese people that give it a base. I feel like both are important to try and get the game to a stage where a comeback to the West would be possible. But it's certainly optimistic having a company like NetEase that has the capabilities of bringing a game like that back to the West. They've other games they've published before are not only in China, they are also in the West. So that does give me some confidence that it can be done, that it is a when, not an if. But I believe that the when does greatly depend on not only interest in the West. Obviously, there's no point publishing it here if there's not a big enough interest, but also the the rise of the East, hopefully, so that the game is actually popular.
Astolfo.
As for when, too late, in my opinion. I think it'll come out in hopefully 2021 in China, and it needs to come out in the West by 2022 because, I mean, let's be honest, guys. Your game, as great as it is, it doesn't look like a 2022 game unless you want to remake the whole thing from textures, models, skeletons, everything from the ground up again, which I highly doubt you have funding to do. You're gonna you got to get this game released. That's all I'm gonna say, and I think it's gonna be popular over there, and I think it will come to the West. It's all of when and how time efficiently they can do it, and how much CA will support them in doing it.
Shlomi?
Yeah, I hope for 2021, but yeah, I think it's gonna be 2022 at the earliest. And as Astolfo said, they're running the danger of falling behind technically, not just graphically, also with gameplay and the possibilities that games nowadays have if they don't release rather sooner than later, once again.
Yeah, and for me, I think realistically and optimistically as well, I think those things actually combined in here. The release in China, as in open beta, right, will happen in 2020, sometime this year. And then a full release in China and in the West will happen sometime in 2021. 2022 just seems so far away and so late. That is just no way they're not going to not release it in 2021 or until the end of 2021. Maybe even in 2020. That is far less likely. I mean, Chinese release in 2020, sure, no problem. Coming back to the West in 2020, less likely, and that's why I'm rather would lean into 2021 and hopefully the first half rather than the latter half. But as long as it's 2021, I guess I'll be fine. So with that, our little predictions at the end, let's end the podcast. Thank you guys for showing up and having the discussion with me. Foxy.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah, hey, George.
It was really fun.
Yeah, it was good. It was enjoyable. I hope we covered everything.
Astolfo.
Thanks, guys, for listening and having me.
And Shlomi.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if you made it to this part, keep going.
Yeah, I hope we guys didn't bore you to death with our quite long show. But yeah, it is the game that we love to talk about and we love playing it, and that's why it sometimes takes long. It's all about the feedback, right? So yes, go guys into the comments below, give us your own feedback. Tell us what you think about the things we've discussed and any other thing regarding balance or the other test, the test that we had. Just any type of feedback, put it in the comments below. Visit our Discord, you can also provide feedback there and just discuss the game in a more open manner, since the YouTube section is not maybe the best thing, the best place to do it. And I will see you there and on Arena's battlefields whenever the next test actually comes. Commanders.